The Denver Broncos 2023 opponents have been revealed. We know who the Denver Broncos will play on the road. We'll know who they play at home more than likely. How does the schedule look ahead of the 2023 season? We dive into that. Not to mention, we get into Fan Friday with the avid members all across Broncos country, and we answer some questions as what should the Broncos' emphasis be? Should they look at maybe drafting another pass-catching tight end? You get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in and making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Whether you listen on your favorite audio podcasting platform, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, or whether you're watching us on YouTube, we appreciate you so much. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe to that follow button if you've not done so already, so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more every single day, all year long. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, my friend, you know, this season has been just a roller coaster of ups and downs. We've had a lot of great engagement with Broncos country. There's a lot of disappointment amongst the fan base, but there's also things to look forward to, right? And I think that anytime that the season's not going how you hope, it goes in, like, I think for all of us, like media, and I think for the fans, and I think I could speak for the fans, this season has not gone how we have expected, but it always gives you something to look forward to, right? And everyone's like, okay, I wonder what next year will be like. Well, we know who the Broncos will be playing next year. We don't know when and where, but we know that they'll be on the road. We'll know who they play at home. It's just a multitude of things, and I tell you what, on paper, another challenging year ahead.
It is, Cody. I mean, you look at the road games alone, and I think obviously you're looking at some of the toughest potentially, teams to play, not necessarily toughest road environments. I think in recent years, that's kind of become a bit more overrated, but there's still home field advantage for a lot of teams. Obviously, we know got to go to Kansas City, got to go to LA, Las Vegas, but the Broncos will go to Miami next year to play the Dolphins, Buffalo to play the Bills, Detroit to play one of the best offenses in the league, the Detroit Lions, and they'll go see Justin Fields in Chicago along with whoever is playing quarterback for the Houston Texans next year on the road. So that's kind of the first thing that you look for when you find out opponents, right, for the next year is like, okay, where do we got to go on the road to play? Because, gosh, Cody, when I look at that, I see at least 2 or 3, maybe 4, up to 5 potential 12 o'clock and even 6 if you consider the Chiefs away game. Potential for all these games to be in that noon window. For me, it's 11 Mountain Time for people in Denver and Colorado area. But, man, that's the worst. That to me, you look at those and you see like all those teams like Houston, Miami, Buffalo, those teams always play in that 1 o'clock window. You just hate to see it. But you know what? That's what I look at and that's what I see. But I see tough teams in addition to potentially playing in the early time slot.
Oh, when I initially tweeted out, like, man, the Broncos 2023 opponents are tough, everyone's like, well, it's not like this year was going to be an easier. Like, here's the reality. I'm a firm believer. It doesn't matter what people say about strength of schedule. I don't care about none of that stuff. That stuff, as we've all talked about, like, it doesn't matter. There's no relevancy to it because every NFL schedule, every team's schedule is hard. There is no easy schedule. If there was, we'd see a lot more teams maybe going for an undefeated season at this point. But, you kind of mentioned, you brought up the Dolphins. Like, obviously, Denver's going to take on the AFC East this year. You got the Dolphins and the Bills, 2 of the toughest teams in that division. And you're going to be on the road. Like, that Miami game, is it early on in the season? Because if that's the case, like we've seen, if it's an early kickoff, it's at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. Okay, now you got to worry about really, really hot conditions, swampy conditions in Miami. What about the Buffalo Bills? Is it late in December, early January, where you potentially have to play in blizzards and snowstorms? Like, there's all these storylines there. Obviously, Chicago, the Windy City, rain, whatever you may have. You could have some snow in Chicago. And then we have the Texans on here because basically it projects out some of the other divisions that Denver will face. They'll face an opponent from various divisions, but it's projected as of right now, Denver's projected to finish last inside the AFC West. So when you look at the AFC North, the last team that's projected to finish there, obviously, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's going to be a home game. We'll talk about that. But for the AFC South, The Broncos more than likely will be on the road to take on the Texans because the Texans are projected to finish last in that South Division. Let's take a look at some of the home opponents for Denver. Obviously, outside your AFC West matchups between Patrick Mahomes, the Kansas City Chiefs, Justin Herbert, the Los Angeles Chargers. Will Derek Carr be a member of the Las Vegas Raiders after this year? I mean, that's a lot of questions. But then your other two AFC East opponents, the New York Jets and maybe Mike White, maybe a different quarterback, maybe Zach Wilson, the New England Patriots and Bill Belichick, always a tough draw, tough matchup. But then you get also host two NFC North teams, Sayre, with the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers coming to town. And then, as we mentioned as well, with the other non-conference, we have one conference game against the potential, whoever's going to finish last in the AFC North. We project that to be Pittsburgh, so that'll be a home game for Denver. And then Denver will play an NFC East team, whoever finishes last there, which right now looks like it could either be the New York Giants or it could be the Washington Commanders based on how tough that division is. So a lot of challenges here for this Broncos team. And I'll be very intrigued to see how this offseason kind of shapes things. But at least we know who the Broncos are playing this upcoming year.
Right. And you look at that schedule, you look at not necessarily the schedule, but you look at the opponents and you see that the Broncos are going to need to have an edge in the coaching department. Like for all the talk about transition and things that go on, like you're going to be playing a lot of the best teams in the NFL in both conferences. So a lot of really good offenses, a lot of really good coaches, a lot of really great players. And so you've got to have that edge. I think as we kind of look with one eye on the future a little bit, as we're in evaluation season here, that really bodes well for the potential of changing of a coach, in my opinion. If when you look at these different opponents that the Broncos are going to be playing, you look at the way that they've played this year, especially in close games, where if you flipped every one possession game, Cody, I saw a little graphic that somebody put out this week. Can't remember who it was, but if every one score game was flipped around with the outcome, the Broncos would have been 7-5 at this point. That really speaks a lot to coaching, not just, a defensive collapse late in the game or the offense not being able to put up points against, X, Y, or Z, which they haven't been able to all year. But really, a lot of it comes down to coaching, game management, situational, X, Y, Z. You could point to a number of different things, whether that's offense, defense, or special teams, or clock management, or whatever. So you look at all those great opponents on next year's schedule, and to me, I see the Broncos needing a huge edge in the coaching department, and that could mean that we're going to see some change happening in 2023.
I'll be very eager this offseason to kind of revisit this right after the landscape is set, because usually there's a period where teams fire coaches and they go and they hire the coaches, maybe like before OTAs or before like maybe free agency or something like that. We can take a look at the schedule here again. The opponents say, okay, hey, based on what Denver decides to do they have an advantage? Do they have a disadvantage in the coaching realm side of things? But Broncos Country, let us know what you think about the Broncos slated opponents for the 2023 NFL season. If you're watching on YouTube, drop it in the comment section down below. If you're listening on your favorite audio podcasting platform, tweet us on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. But coming up on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, it is Fan Friday, and Broncos Country sent in their questions to be answered here on the show, including should the Broncos look at drafting another pass-catching tight end? That's something you'll get on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But this show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Unfortunately, life doesn't come with a user manual, so when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Therapists, they're trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient, secure, and accessible anywhere, 100% online. That's one of the things I like about it. I've taken advantage of BetterHelp with the Locked On Podcast Network, and I found a therapist that matches me really well, what I need and what I look for when I try to find a therapist to help me solve some of the issues I have in my day-to-day life, and also how to better deal with stress. And I tell you what, all you do is you fill out a survey when you sign up, and they match you with a therapist. If you do not vibe well with your therapist, you can change your therapist at any time until you find the right fit. And everyone deserves to feel their best. BetterHelp makes it easier to get started. And as the world's largest therapy service, they've matched millions of people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. All the benefits of in-person therapy, plus it's more convenient, more accessible, and more affordable. No more waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon today. As we continue on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we're diving into some Fan Friday questions from members of Broncos Country that have sent in their questions to be answered on today's episode of the show. If you ever want to be featured here on Locked On Broncos, all you have to do is tweet myself at Cody Roark NFL, Sayre Bedinger at Sayre Bedinger, and at Locked On Broncos. And make sure you always use the hashtag Fan Friday, just because if you tweet us randomly and we don't know if it's like Tuesday or Wednesday and you send that out, make sure you use that hashtag just so we can catch that in case we do miss it when we put the tweet prompt out there as well. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, or whether you watch us on YouTube. We appreciate you so much for bearing with us through this difficult season. I'm at every Broncos practice, home game, away game, so you can get as much up close and personal as possible. That's something that Sayre and I try to do. We try to bring level-headed, objective coverage to the team that you root for on Sundays. Sayre, let's get into some questions that we received here for Fan Friday here today. And as always get some great ones from this avid follower on Twitter at newtype_JK47. He asked the question, should the Broncos actually invest in a pass-catching tight end in the 2023 NFL draft? Russ seemed to love passing to our tight ends, additionally mimicking the two tight end offense New England had very effectively years ago, and maybe even give the Broncos identity it desperately needs. Now, here's my thing to the point about New England, right? Is there a team right now in the NFL that we really see thrive in that two tight end set? I think every really good offense has one really good guy. I think Greg Dulcich is that guy for Denver. Should Denver maybe look at a pass catching tight end in the 2023 NFL draft here?
I think that they should look for somebody who's got kind of the complete package, maybe, and maybe not just a specifically pass catching guy, because I think Greg Dulcich is going to be that guy. He's going to be tight end one next year. He's going to be the guy that everybody expects. Plus, I mean, believe it or not, Albert Okwuegbunam, let me whisper this quick. He's still under contract next year, which is, I mean, it's crazy to think. So he's still on the team next year as of this point in time. We'll see what transpires over the course of the offseason. But there's two pass-catching tight ends that you've already got. In my opinion, I would look more for somebody that could do a little bit of everything. Maybe they don't do one thing super great. Maybe they're just really good at kind of everything. Sort of like when the Seahawks took Will Dissly back in the day. I know they took him pretty early on by comparison to what a lot of people had expected. But somebody like that who doesn't blow you away maybe with like his long speed or, his ability after the catch or something like that, but just somebody who can start, play for a really long time, be an effective player, but probably not specifically a pass catching tight end. I think you've got that guy in Greg Dulcich.
Yeah, I think, when we look at this team right now, I just feel like there's other needs besides tight end. Like, obviously, think you need to add another guy at some point, right? Whether you bring back Eric Sauber, which I think that Denver should. He's a core special teams guy. I had a chance to speak with Dwayne Stukes. Sauber is one of those key dudes there. Obviously, you have him on a one-year deal right now. It expires after this year. Andrew Beck's expires. Eric Tomlinson's expires after this year. So realistically, going into next season, you are right. It is Greg Dulcich and Albert O who are still under contract for this Broncos team. And I think a lot of it will be dependent upon what happens, right, with coaching, right? Is there going to be a change, right? I think ideally, if there is a coaching change, that could benefit Albert Okwuegbunam, because as it seems right now, like under Nathaniel Hackett and this staff, it just doesn't seem like they really value what Albert O can do as a potential pass catching option, which is unfortunate because at this point in time, like, why not try something different because of the fact you're banged up at wide receiver? To me, it's just a frustrating pain point as we talk about this. I think you and I have been on the record saying I feel like Albert O is getting a very raw deal in Denver this year under Nathaniel Hackett, under Jake Moreland. It's just unfortunate because this is a guy that we've seen be able to do big things. Heck, I mean, just go back to that Seattle game in that week one matchup. How many times did we see him? There was like 2 or 3 plays. It was like 3rd and short, 4th down. He caught the ball short, right? But he fought to get the first down, something that everyone was complaining. Oh, Noah Fant never falls forward. Noah Fant never finds the extra effort. He's having a lot of success right now in Seattle. Obviously very happy for Noah. But like for Albert O, like Albert O demonstrates the heart and the grit that you want out of a guy. And from that very moment, they went away from him. And to me, it's the most baffling thing in the world. So we'll see what Denver decides to do at the tight end position. I think it's obviously something they need to look at. But with how the college game is played these days, you don't really see a lot of inline guys anymore. So it's like, how can you expect, maybe unless you're Georgia Tech, Army, whatever it may be, there's these tight ends that are, it's run, Iowa being another one of them. I mean, Denver loves Iowa tight ends, but to me, it's something they should look at, but I'll be very intrigued to see if they entertain that or if they, address that in free agency, which comes before the NFL draft. Now, this one obviously comes in from Jordan Lopez, J22 Lopez on Twitter. Why do people hate on Jerry Jeudy so much? And Sayre, I think this is one where I feel like a lot of people are wrong about Jerry Jeudy, right? Like for me, being at practice every day, being in the locker room, I get to see Jerry Jeudy, man. In my opinion, he's got one of the best personalities on the football team. He's funny. He's engaged. He's having fun in the locker room. He got guys that just go up and hang out with him. Like Jerry is a great team guy. And I think so much of this anger or this hatred we see deflected towards Jerry, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm eager to hear your perspective on it, is, okay, well, his rookie year, he had that one game against the Chargers, all the drops, and that really is kind of just encapsulated people's opinions of Jerry. Oh, he's a drop artist, this and that. We see that narrative being thrown out. Last year, what was it? He gets injured week 1 after having a dominant first half, 6 catches, 72 yards against the New York Giants. Comes back 7 weeks later, goes off against the Dallas Cowboys, has a big game there, and then Pat Shurmur says, okay, we're just going to motion you. We're not even going to get you the football anymore, Jerry, for the rest of the year. So there's that. And then coming into this year, we see it. Jerry Jeudy, 67-yard touchdown in his first game against the Seattle Seahawks. The next week, he gets hurt. And then after that, the Broncos just don't use him on the offensive side of the ball. And everyone's like, oh, Jerry, he's got drops. He's struggling with drops. But the reality is he's not anywhere close to leading the team in drops. It's Cortland Sutton. So it's like we see him last week, 38% of the snaps, 4 catches, 65 yards. Like, what more does Jerry Jeudy have to do to win the approval of this fan base? I just don't understand the hate towards Jerry.
Right. I think he has to go out there and basically be Justin Jefferson or, Jamar Chase or, all these guys that are dominating coming out of the college ranks right away in the NFL, especially with Jefferson coming in that 2020 class along with that. That was a vaunted receiver class. And even you see CD Lamb playing well for Dallas. That was a very, very good wide receiver class. And people grade Jerry Jeudy on that curve, which is unfair because I think he's been the Broncos' best offensive player this year. And I don't think anybody really wants to be, handing out, awards to the offensive side of the ball this year. And certainly it's not very deserving. But if you had to pick the best player on that side of the ball this season, to me and for my money, I'm taking Jerry Jeudy. He's been the most dynamic guy in space. He's made the most plays. He's been the most consistent. When they get him the ball, he's the one guy that really does something with it. And I know that's, once again, who else are we looking at it for that award, that category, right? Greg Dulcich at this point. So I think Jerry Jeudy, he's been far and away to me the best offensive player for the Broncos. He's been that guy that when you need a big play, boy, he's going to go out there and make it. He's got speed. He's got after the catch ability. I don't understand why people don't like him unless they're just really hating on the rest of the offense, but he does get an unfair rap. It's kind of like, how Cody, when people vote for the Pro Bowl or whatever, it's like, well, this guy was popular like 2 or 3 years ago, but he's getting in this year. That's kind of how it is with Jerry Jeudy. Like you mentioned, people kind of hate on him for what happened 2 or 3 years ago, and they haven't gotten over it. They refuse to get over it. That's just who the guy is to them. It's like, I don't know what else he does have to do, to be honest. I know a higher volume of target share, maybe a few more 100-yard games, maybe a few more touchdowns would do it. I don't know exactly what people need to see. The guy was out there with a bum ankle on Sunday, and he was the best offensive player again. So, it's crazy to see. It's crazy to watch this unfold. I tend to ignore all that noise, Cody. I don't really see a ton of it anymore. But, man, if there's people that are out there still saying it, in the words of my, hometown hero, Scott Hoy, please stop. Please stop it. That's all you got to do is please stop it.
I love it, man. And I want to see Jerry have, a lot of success. He still has the opportunity to finish the year with over 1,000 receiving yards. He's on pace for it. If he does play, like I said, he's looked good so far this week in practice from what I've seen of Jerry. So I'm excited to see how things go. And hopefully, people that hate on Jerry Jeudy subsides, because I think a lot of it is very unwarranted. But Broncos Country will continue on here with Fan Friday. On today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, dive into the question that if Nathaniel Hackett is fired after the season, who could the Broncos take a look at on the coaching side of things? You'll get that on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. But this episode of the show was brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. And PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports done right. With the PrizePicks app, you choose 2 to 5 players that you're focused on heading into the week. And these players, they'll have a projection that's set by PrizePicks. And you simply choose whether or not they will have more or less than their PrizePicks projection, which could allow you to win 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. And first-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Continuing on here on Fan Friday. On today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, just a few days away from kickoff as the Broncos host the Kansas City Chiefs, 2:05 p.m. Mountain Time kickoff, Empower Field at Mile High. Can the Broncos compete against the Kansas City Chiefs is a huge question. Make sure you stay tuned for Sunday's episode of the show to be a post-game report breaking down all the action of the Broncos game against Patrick Mahomes and company. Sayre, continue on today's Fan Friday here. Our next question that we received comes in from Steven Safi, and he says, I know it's premature, but if Nathaniel Hackett is gone after the season, who would you rather have as the next head coach? Shane Steichen or Dan Quinn? Love the show. Keep up the great work. I mean, we know Dan Quinn was a candidate last year. The Broncos had interviewed him. Obviously, he chose to go back to Dallas. I know that our good friend Ben Albright was on the train of Dan Quinn. My question is at this point, and like nothing against Steven's question, but like for me, I want to see who they have interest in. If they do fire Nathaniel Hackett, I feel like I could answer this better if I saw who the candidates were, right? I know that Steichen's name's been brought up. Dan Quinn's name's been brought up. There's been a multitude of other guys, Frank Reich. I think we just have to see where the interest is and how appealing is the Denver job. But I'm curious for your thoughts on this question here.
Yeah, I like the question. I like starting to get the ball rolling, thinking of potential candidates, because I do think there's going to be a change, Cody. That's kind of where I'm at. And I think the Broncos job is more attractive than maybe it seems on the surface, because, gosh, these guys, the owners have a lot of money, and that money is going to go to a coach. And sure enough, I think these professionals are going to be willing to work for a lot of money. Just a hunch that I have, Cody, that they're going to be willing to do that. So I think if it's between these two candidates, though, here's where I'm at on Dan Quinn. I'm not anti-defensive guys. I'm pro getting somebody in there that's going to be the best for Russell Wilson in terms of, man, if he needs more accountability in the meeting room or whatever the case may be, somebody willing to say the hard things to him, that's something that I want. Number two is I want somebody that's going to be able to get the best out of him. But number three, if things don't work out with Russell Wilson, who's the best candidate that's going to help you develop quarterbacks down the road? To me, Shane, I mean, you look at what he did with Justin Herbert during the pandemic year back in 2020 when he was with the Chargers. Obviously now with Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles, that would be an easy pick for me, because I don't know who's the offensive coordinator coming with Dan Quinn. And even if it's the best offensive coordinator candidate, you have no idea how long they would be in Denver. If they do a great job, they're going to get a head coaching job somewhere else. And that's great. That means that the team is probably having success. But what does that mean in terms of this turnover? Consistency has been non-existent for the Broncos as long as I can remember. So it's not that I'm anti-defensive oriented head coaches, but I'm very much pro getting the quarterback situation figured out, whether that's getting Russ back on track, or if it's developing a young quarterback. You've got to be, if you're the Denver Broncos, I think you've got to be able, after the 2023 season is over, you have to be able to decide definitively, okay, Russell Wilson was the problem, or he wasn't, or we need to move on to a young guy. And I think you have to have the right candidate in place. And so I would pick Shane in that, one or the other situation.
Well, I also think about it too, right? You mentioned the ownership group having a lot of money. That's going to be appealing. They can throw money at people. Denver will still be paying for Vic Fangio. Denver will still be paying for Nathaniel Hackett's coaching salary. They'd be paying 3 coaches essentially. But I think the biggest thing here for me, if they do move on from Nathaniel Hackett, I don't know if you can take the risk of going with another first-year head coach. Denver has tried that 3 times in a row, and it simply has not worked out. And I think that's kind of that's the pain point here, right? Like for me, it's like touching the stove. You've done it 3 times in a row, and you certainly haven't learned from it each time. It's like, do I touch the stove again and hope that, maybe it's not hot this time? I have no idea how it's going to transpire, what's going to happen this offseason, but the first-year head coaching track has not panned out for the Denver Broncos, and I think you maybe have to try to figure out who is the best candidate at this point in time for these reasons. And Obviously, if a move happens, we'll have a little bit more here, Locked On Broncos. But our final question comes in from Myers Mile High, and I'll let you answer this one, Sayre. What if it turns out that Russ is the problem? So many conflicting quarterback analyst reports, and that he doesn't fit Hackett's scheme. Then Peyton and the Broncos wind up firing a potential good coach and lose Evero in the process because of a new coach. This is an interesting angle here.
It is, because I mean, you're obviously asking here in this question, what are you thinking in terms of your pro scouting department? What is George Payton seeing? We know he loves to get boots on the ground when he evaluates quarterbacks. So what is he seeing on a day-to-day basis with Russell Wilson? What are the pro scouts seeing? What is everybody in the team seeing? At the end of the season, I'm sure they're going to have meetings before a decision is made on Nathaniel Hackett's future or anything like that. I'm sure they're going to have meetings and have pretty honest, straightforward, heart to heart on, okay, here's where things are at. If it turns out they decide that Russell Wilson is the problem, here's what you got to do. Obviously, you got to bring Russell back for 2023. You got no choice but to do that. But then, in my opinion, I've said this before and I'll continue to say it probably so many times on this podcast that people are going to get sick of hearing it, but I'll say it again right now. You have to get multiple contingency plans for Russell Wilson in 2023, especially if you determine, okay, yeah, he was a very, very big part of the problem this past year. It wasn't just Nathaniel Hackett. If you determine Russell Wilson is a big part of the problem or the problem, you have to go out, in my opinion, you have to add somebody that's got starting experience and a little bit of upside in free agency. And I know that money is a situation there. There's factors there, but there's guys like Gardner Minshew out there. Jacoby Brissett did a decent job for Cleveland this year. That's not what anybody wants for the long-term situation, but you have to be able to hedge your bets with Russ. And then I think you go into the 2023 NFL draft thinking to yourself, okay, in round one, Hendon Hooker's sitting there, Anthony Richardson, somebody else that we like. You take that guy in the late first round and start to really push Russ and get that clock going.
It's going to be very interesting to see how this offseason pans out. One thing is for certain, Broncos Country, Sayre and I will be here with you every step of the way, every single day, all year, throughout the entire offseason, throughout training camp, throughout OTAs, the draft, free agency, in season next year, and throughout the entire remainder of this year as well. We know it hasn't been the season that any of us have hoped for, but we appreciate you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform or whether you watch on YouTube. Sayre and I, we're going to be back on Sunday following the Broncos-Chiefs games. Once I get home from the stadium, we'll fire up the post-game show and you get all the coverage, all the reaction here, and hopefully, the Broncos can shock the world.